Welcome to Podkey Fantasy Football, where today's draft hype gets stress tested before it costs you. Quarterback depth looks real, but depth changes the draft only if you understand what kind of depth it is. A lot of this episode comes down to separating usable options from league-winning ones and separating camp noise from actual edge. In Superflex, quarterback isn't just another ranking exercise, it's a supply problem first. If roughly 3/4 of NFL starters are viable Week 1 fantasy options in a 12-team league, the question becomes when the room runs out of acceptable starters, not just who has QB7 over QB10. That's why the hero QB logic holds up better in Superflex than in one QB. Locking in 2 top 20 types by the middle rounds gives you insulation against the ugly outcome, which is not missing on ceiling but being forced to start a quarterback you don't actually want. The counterpoint also holds some water. If late-round winners keep showing up, and 9 of the last 16 top 2 finishers were drafted QB9 or later, waiting can work. But that stat needs context. It proves elite seasons emerge from outside the early tier. It does not prove your specific late plan is safe, especially if you punt both spots and need multiple breakouts instead of one. So the most supported middle ground is probably this. Punting quarterback repeatedly is high variance, but forcing an early quarterback when a higher tier at another position is still on the board is also bad process. The reported quarterback depth is unusual. If you can name 16 Week 1 starters you'd feel fine using, that should create late-round value and flatten the middle. ADP, though, is sticky until it isn't. Most quarterbacks may not move much from late July into early August, but stars like Lamar can still get shoved up once camp clips and beat reports start reinforcing priors. And scoring settings can blow up generic quarterback rankings. In 4-point passing touchdown leagues, pure passers lose ground fast. The Matthew Stafford example, dropping around 5.5 points per game versus 6-point formats, is the kind of swing that can reshuffle tiers by itself. That means rushing quarterbacks don't just get a small bump in 4-point formats, they become structurally safer bets because more of their scoring comes from categories. Your league still rewards heavily. Patrick Mahomes being seen running and throwing 7.5 months after ACL surgery is the confirmed part. The projection part is that Kansas City intentionally trims his scramble rate. That projection is pretty reasonable. Teams usually have every incentive to protect franchise quarterbacks after knee surgery, even if the player looks good on video. If the rushing comes down, Mahomes can still be great in real life while losing fantasy ceiling. The second-order effect is interesting. If the offense asks Mahomes to create less with his legs, somebody else has to absorb rushing and red zone work, which is why Kenneth Walker gets mentioned as a fantasy beneficiary. Trevor Lawrence is almost the inverse case. The late-season production spike, over 30 fantasy points per game in his final 7 appearances, plus the career-best rushing, gives the upside case real evidence behind it. The caution is sample size and narrative inflation. A 7-game heater and MVP talk are not the same thing. Still, at a mid-round price around QB9, you don't need an MVP season. You just need the late 2025 changes in play calling and rushing usage to be mostly real. Caleb Williams and Drake May fit the same discussion from different angles. Williams has the better baseline resume, but the rookie development risk is also clearer. May feels more like the sharper upside swing if price stays cheaper. A useful theme in the receiver talk is market disagreement. Big rank spreads usually mean uncertainty, but they can also mean room for profit if the market is anchoring on old assumptions. Jacksonville is a good example. Parker Washington's appeal depends on whether you believe prior target share and continuity with Lawrence can beat a sleepy ADP. Jacoby Myers has a cleaner case because chemistry, extension, and role stability are easier to project than spike week upside. Brian Thomas Jr. being called overpriced doesn't mean he's bad. It means the market may already be charging for the breakout before fully accounting for target competition. With the Chargers, Ladd McConkey at WR19 is really a scheme bet as much as a player bet. If the offense truly leans into speed and efficiency, that price leaves room. Quentin Johnson and Trey Harris are cheaper bets on specialized usage and contingent upside. For the Giants, Malik Neighbors moving off PUP matters immediately, but it doesn't erase the larger health risk. Darnell Mooney's appeal is simpler. If Neighbors misses time, there's a plausible volume path at a very low cost. At running back, the biggest mistake is treating all uncertainty the same. Josh Jacobs has football uncertainty and off-field uncertainty, and the legal cloud matters because it can change availability, not just efficiency. Kenneth Walker's Chiefs case is cleaner. Better line, stronger scoring environment, and playoff usage that hints at a larger role. The optimistic projection, 20-plus touches a game, is still a projection, but at least the mechanism is visible. Jonathan Brooks and Saquon Barkley show the other side of valuation. Brooks is a medical bet with real upside if the recovery holds. Barkley is more about whether the market is underweighting environment and prior explosiveness. At tight end, Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren, and Kyle Pitts all represent volume cases just at different prices. George Kittle is the classic stash profile where the upside is obvious, but the Achilles risk is doing the discounting for you. Camp News really does move this stuff. Malik Neighbors off PUP, Mahomes cleared, Daniel Jones back from the Achilles, Kittle starting on PUP. Those are not all equal pieces of news, and the edge comes from asking whether the update changes role, efficiency, or simply public sentiment. A lot of best ball debate still gets framed like ideology, zero RB versus hero RB, playoff correlation versus raw projection. The smarter read is that tools have changed the payoff for hand-built complexity. If solvers and draft assistants already account for late-round depth and Week 16 and 17 correlations, then manually forcing those angles may be less edge and more theatre. That doesn't mean structure is irrelevant. Tiers still matter, especially at quarterback. Don't chase a lower-tier passer just because the room got antsy if a Tier 1 player at another position is sitting there. And early season schedule should stay what it is. A tiebreaker, not a religion. Soft opening slates can help with short-term ROI and early trade windows, but they should not overwrite talent, role, or format. That's the board right now. Real quarterback depth, real camp volatility, and a lot of prices that only make sense in the right format. Thanks for listening to Podkey Fantasy Football. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.